All right, hello and welcome to our last satellite tutorial. Took me a while to start this recording. I was trying to also record in my other software to be uploaded on YouTube. All right, uh, so in our last satellite tutorial, we are going to look at employment relations in New Zealand. This is our last country. In our last, before this satellite tutorial, we covered employment relations in Australia. I believe the final exam format and coverage is already out. Please have a look at that. It's already there on Moodle. You can have a look at the final exam format and coverage. I believe that all the countries are covered except Sweden, including Pacific Island countries is also covered. Please note that. So you've got UK, USA, Japan, Germany, Australia, and New Zealand. Again, note Sweden is not covered. However, Pacific Island countries is covered, whereby you will be required to provide examples from the Pacific Island countries. And like you have been doing with your assignment 1 and assignment 2, where you have selected maybe just one Pacific Island country. So stick to that Pacific Island country and you will be fine. All right, employment relations in New Zealand. So New Zealand was also a British colony. So UK has influenced employment relations in the New Zealand as well. So 1770 British colony. So British influenced the employment relations in New Zealand. And the current population was 4.6 million. This is not 2020 data, please note that. It's a couple of years back. So 4.6 million was the population. 72% European, 14% are Maori, 5% Pacific Islanders, and 9% is others. Workforce is 2 million, and out of that, 1.3 million are full time workers, and half a million are on part time, casual, and temporary work. So, the role of the government, right? We are going to look at the three ER and IR parties. You will find quite some similarities between New Zealand and Australia. So, recall some notes from Australia. So when did industrialization began in New Zealand? 1890s. This is when IR started off. Beginning of IR, and here was the rise of the trade unions and strikes, and this was because of working conditions and poor wages. Whenever the working conditions and wages are compromised, the trade union always comes in and tries to fight for the rights of the workers. So, example, in 1890 there was a strike, dock workers strike. The first ER legislation to be passed in New Zealand was the ICAA. It was called Industrial Conciliation and Arbitration Act, 1894. This was when this legislation was passed. You will note, compare this with Australia. Australia had a similar legislation, isn't it? In fact, they had compulsory arbitration and conciliation act. So here it's something similar, conciliation and arbitration act. So let's look at what were some of the main features of this legislation. Please note that these legislation and laws, legislation and laws, fall under the government. So when you discuss the government in your exam, remember to mention the current IR or ER legislation that they have. Do not worry about historical data much. For example, in New Zealand, the ICAA is no longer there. It has been repealed, and the current legislation that they have is anyone knows? Was the current legislation is passed in the year 1999, though it has been amended every now and then. It's the Employment Relations Act, same as what we have here in Fiji. We have the ERA 2007. Likewise, in New Zealand, they have got Employment Relations Act, and things like collective bargaining and these things are also voluntary, just like what we have here in the or in Fiji. All right, so note that the current legislation that they have is Employment Relations Act. I think the year is 1999 or 2000. I'll just check and confirm that. I think 1999 is UK. Yes, in New Zealand, it's Employment Relations Act 2000. It was passed in the year 2000. So let's look at some of the main features of the first legislation that they had, the Industrial Conciliation and Arbitration Act. So it recognized and provided legal room for trade union to exist, organize members, and engage in collective bargaining. It provided minimum wages and working conditions, wage settlements and industry agreements awards on wages, recognized and provided legal room for employers associations to engage in industrial and employment relations. There was active involvement of the state, third party intervention to pass laws, legislations, provided a legal procedure for settling disputes by the government. The first step for resolving dispute was within an organization between the management and the workers and the trade or the trade unions, right? So this actually this method of resolving dispute is the first method for almost all the countries, and it is more prominent in Japan compared to all the other countries, whereby the management and the workers, they sit together and they talk and talk and talk, where they call it the dialogue system of resolving disputes. So something similar was present, whereby the management and the workers, or the representatives of these workers, which is the trade unions, they try and resolve the dispute through this dialogue system. The second step was to seek state intervention, so through conciliation and mediation process. And then the third step was arbitration. Please note that these notes, lecture notes, has been uploaded on Moodle, as well as some textbook notes with regards to employment relations in New Zealand has been uploaded on Moodle. The current textbook that we are using does not have notes on New Zealand. So do not worry, the notes have been uploaded on Moodle. So the ICAA 1894, this lasted for almost 100 years, till 1991, and then came the Employment Contracts Act 1991. So this was a major change and some major reforms in employment relations. The Employment Contracts Act, it favored the businesses. It was pro-employer, right wing, not left wing. Left wing favors the workers. Please do not get this confused between left wing and right wing. The right wing are the pro-employer, left wing pro-worker, or trade unions. So by passing this Employment Contracts Act 1991, they started the deregulation of businesses, which is less rules and regulation for businesses, and it started to re-regulate the labor market, re-regulation of the labor market. That is more rules for trade unions and workers. This is the Employment Contract Act is the legislation which introduced individual bargaining. So there was a shift from centralized CB, centralized collective bargaining, to individual bargaining, and introduced the contract system. So individual contracts was introduced in by the Employment Contracts Act. Now, in almost all the countries, this is common, whereby the collective bargaining has declined. With out of all the countries we have studied, or in all the countries that we have studied, the collective bargaining is declining and individual bargaining is increasing, isn't it? Even to the extent that now centralized collective bargaining is decentralizing, moving towards enterprise level collective bargaining rather than collective bargaining taking place at the industry level. So shift, there was a shift from centralized collective bargaining to individual bargaining and decentralized bargaining, as well as a shift to contract system, individual contracts, right, rather than permanent jobs. So this forms the part of trends. Even this is happening now, that the number of permanent jobs, full-time jobs, is declining. The number of agency workers is increasing. It's quite prominent in developed countries that they have agency workers. Do you know who agency workers are? Do you know who part-time workers are? Casual workers, fixed-term contracts workers. Yes. So full-time or permanent workers are those that don't have an expiry date to their contract, and they work full-time. Contractual workers work on a contract, usually valid for 1 to 3 years, in some cases 5 years as well. These are also sometimes called fixed term contracts, whereby a fixed term is for probably a it's a shorter period, usually less than 12 months, say 6 months, 9 months, 3 months, fixed term contracts. Part-time jobs are those workers that are not full-time employed. Instead of working a full 40-hour week, they probably work maybe around 20 hours per week. Seasonal workers are those workers that work during a particular season, like here in Fiji, the cane cutters, those are seasonal workers. They work only when it's the cane crushing season. Or in New Zealand, for example, during the fruit picking season, these are called seasonal workers. Agency workers are workers that work for an agency and not a particular organization. So, in developed countries, they have recruitment agencies and things like that, whereby what happens is if an organization has an employee absent and there is no one to fill in for that position, what would happen is they will call up this agency and the agency will send a worker from their agency to work for that organization for a certain number of period. For example, the worker is not there for 2 days, so this agency worker would be working for that organization for 2 days. For example, if you run a restaurant business and your chef calls in sick for 2 days, now where are you going to get another chef? So you call the agency and you say that you need a chef, and the agency has got chef, so they will send the chef to work for your organization for 2 days. Those are agency workers. So there is an increase in agency workers as well in developed countries. So shift towards a contract system rather than permanent jobs, abolished the arbitration court, reduced the government's role in dispute resolution, introduced private mediators, example lawyers, which employer and the employees have to pay. So from a free based mediation to a fee based mediation. Also abolished the award system of pay determination, weakened the trade union right to strike, and started the deregulation of the labor market, major reforms. So you can see that these things favored the employers and the businesses, the Employment Contracts Act. And then it was also repealed by the 2000 Employment Relations Act of 2000. And this legislation is a mixture of both. It's not all favors the employers, and it also does not all the time favors the workers. So it is a 50-50, employers and workers. It is somewhat similar to what we have here in Fiji, the Employment Relations Act 2007. It is a combination, and the legislations should be such that it does not restrict the movement of any one party. So that's all about the government. Also note some of the major political parties present in New Zealand. They just recently had their election just this month, I think, in October, and the prime minister is the same. right? Jacinda Ardern belongs to the Labour Party, and Labour Party is known to be a left-wing political party. And what does that mean? Left-wing political party. Just told you a while ago. Left-wing means it favors the workers. Yes, I think one of the promises that Labour Party had while campaigning was to increase the number of sick leave days. Currently, I think New Zealand has got the legislation has a minimum of 5 days sick leave. So the Labour Party campaigned for a 10 days sick leave. So let's see now that the Labour Party has won whether this will happen or not. Together with this, there is also minimum wages present in New Zealand. I think their current minimum wage is at the moment is $18.90 per hour, New Zealand dollars. Other major political parties that they have is the National Party, right? These are the two major political parties, the National Party and the Labour Party in New Zealand. Other political parties involve the Greens, I think. There's an ACT party. They have a NZ Fest party. There's a Maori party and so forth. But the two major ones are the Labour Party and the National Party. Yeah? All right, so that's all about the government. Moving on to TUC or trade unions. Yeah? And just like any other country, New Zealand also has a number of trade unions. Yeah? And there is usually one body which looks after all these trade unions. So some of the individual trade unions that are present in New Zealand are the Public Service Association (PSA). They also have an engineers union, printers union, energy union, manufacturing union, communications union. So these are all the individual unions, or examples of individual unions that are present in New Zealand. Please note that most of the unions in New Zealand are industry based, as well as new unions are now enterprise based, meaning that as long as you belong to a particular organization, you can become a member of that particular union. That's enterprise unions. Industrial unions, you belong to a particular industry, only then you can become a member of that particular union. So what is the name of the umbrella body, the main national trade union organization? NZCTU. What does NZCTU stand for? Obviously NZ stands for New Zealand. CTU, please note it's not NZTUC. It's not New Zealand Trade Union Congress. It's NZCTU. I've seen students make this mistake. Please note again that it is New Zealand CTU, Council of Trade Union. New Zealand Council of Trade Union, not New Zealand Trade Union Congress. And just like what you have seen in other countries as well, NZCTU does not directly involved in the collective bargaining process. However, it does help affiliate and member unions to or help them in the collective bargaining process. So this union, NZ CTU Council of Trade Union, was founded, I think, in 1987. So this is the umbrella body of a trade union, and it provides advice to its members, lobbies the government to have legislations passed in favor of the workers, obviously, and has been successful to some extent. As you can see that the Labour Party is in power now, right? Even in their last election, the Labour Party was in power with Jacinda Ardern as their prime minister. So legislations have been in favor of the workers. Note that this Labour Party is not an extreme left-wing political party. It is a center-left party, which means nowadays, before I go on to that, nowadays the political parties are not very extremist political parties. That yes, this political party is a left-wing, 100% left-wing political party, or yes, that this political party is a 100% right-wing political party. Now it does not happen like that. There is some give and take, and when I say center left party or center right political party, so a center left party, maybe 60 to 70% of the time will pass legislations in favor of the workers, and 30 to 40% of the time will pass legislations in favor of the employers. So that's what a center left party means. Center right party, you reverse it. Center right, majority of the times it will pass legislations in favor of the management, the employers, right? 60 to 70% of the time, and 30 to 40% of the time it will pass legislations in favor of the workers. So it's not an extremist left wing and right wing. So NZCTU is the umbrella body of trade unions in New Zealand. All right. Moving on to employers. Now they have a number of employer associations, and there are three major ones. And if you remember, something similar was present in Australia. Go and have a look at your notes from Australia, and you will find things like round table businesses, or um, whereby the CEOs of big businesses are members of one particular association. So employer associations, they support employers in negotiations, and they lobby the governments on their behalf, and they also provide training, and also at times they do research on behalf of its members to see what are some of the factors that are affecting its members, even on things like how to avoid trade unions. So there are three major employers associations present in New Zealand. So they have got NZEF, NZMF, and NZBRT. The major one out of these three is the EF, the Employers Federation, which covers all the employers that are present. MF, Manufacturers Federation, is there for the manufacturing businesses only. And Business Roundtable, formed in 1970, this consists of CEOs of big businesses. They're very powerful body, and the major thing for the BRT is to lobby the government. So it is the lobby group of the employers to change government economic and employment relations policies. All right, so that's all about employers association. Recent changes. Before we move on to recent changes, briefly looking at the processes. I've talked a bit on collective bargaining. So in New Zealand, they do not have compulsory collective bargaining. Collective bargaining is all voluntary. In all the countries, I think there is just one country out of all the countries that we have studied has compulsory collective bargaining. Yeah? Otherwise, all the other countries have got voluntary collective bargaining. Even in our Pacific Island country, all the countries in the Pacific Island, Tonga, Samoa, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, Fiji, we have got voluntary collective bargaining, good faith collective bargaining. So, good faith collective bargaining means it is not compulsory, however, both the parties are to negotiate in good faith. Usually, the collective agreements they are valid for 1 year up to 3 years, and it is similar with the individual contracts. Like individual contracts are also valid for 1 to 3 years. Some of the issues that are discussed are usually the hours of work, pay, working conditions, and so forth. The level at which collective bargaining takes place is mostly industry level, since more industrial trade unions are present. However, as trade unions are emerging at enterprise level, so collective bargaining is also shifting towards enterprise level collective bargaining. So it is moving away from a centralized collective bargaining to a decentralized collective bargaining. All right, so that's about collective bargaining. Moving on to dispute resolution mechanism. So for dispute resolution, the first step to resolving dispute under Employment Relations Act 2000 is the same as with any other country, whereby the employers and the workers, the management and the workers, or the representative of these workers, which is the unions, they sit together and they talk and they try to resolve and they negotiate and they try to resolve the issue. And if they are unable to resolve the issue, then their first third party dispute resolution mechanism is mediation. They no longer have conciliation, and this is similar to what we have here in Fiji, that the that our first dispute resolution mechanism is also mediation. We don't have conciliation here in Fiji. So same with New Zealand, they do not have conciliation, but their first step to dispute resolution is mediation, and then they have arbitration. They also have a special tribunal, right, or the employment court, which resolves dispute. If mediation fails, if the employees and the employer they do not agree on something, so they go on to mediation, and if mediation fails, then they can take it to the employment court. And from the before the employment court, they actually have got an employment relations authority, so they can take it to that, and if that fails, then take it to employment court, and then the normal court system of the country. All right, so that's how they resolve disputes. And finally, employee involvement and participation. Just like most of the countries that we have studied, employee involvement and participation is totally voluntary in New Zealand. It has not been legislated, and it is all voluntary, like what we have seen in Japan, in UK, in USA. In USA, the employee involvement participation is almost non-existent. So in New Zealand, the EIP is also voluntary. It's up to the organization, it's up to the management whether they want to involve their workers in the workplace or not. And at times, the big businesses they do involve the workers, and not only at the lower level but at the middle level as well. So employee involvement and participation does take place, however, not to a very large extent, and it's voluntary. All right, so that concludes the processes that is present. And lastly, we move on to some recent changes, trends. So the structure of employment has changed radically in recent years. There has been a decline in full-time permanent employment, as I have differentiated all the different types of employment, right? And there is an increase in non-standard form of employment. So there is an expansion in various forms of non-standard employment. So standard employment is what we call full-time permanent employment. That's standard employment, also called typical employment. Non-standard employment is the atypical employment, and this involves casual work, temporary jobs, outsourcing, use of agencies and other labor market intermediaries. The majority of all jobs created during the 1990s were casual and part-time employment. Also, things like feminization of workplace is taking place. More females are joining the workforce. The trade union density has been declining in New Zealand as well, just like in all the other countries that we have seen, right? That the trade union density is declining. So in New Zealand, trade union density is also declining. There is a decline in collective bargaining itself, increase in individual bargaining, also decentralization of collective bargaining, right? Collective bargaining used to happen mostly at industry level. Now it is also shifting away towards enterprise level. More immigrant workers are joining the workforce, right, in special areas or in areas where there is a skill shortage. So these are some of the trends and changes taking place in New Zealand. So this concludes employment relations in New Zealand. Again, if you have any questions, any queries, let me know. Send me an email. Look at the format of the final exam already placed there on Moodle. No further hints so will be provided, right? The format and the coverage has been provided already on Moodle. Please have a look at that. And this concludes all these satellite tutorials. So this was our last satellite tutorial for the semester. And again, I'll upload a copy of this satellite tutorial on YouTube. And if you have any problems with the big blue button, please look at the copy on YouTube. All right, thank you all.